Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Investor Select Conference. My name is Ben Shamsian, Vice President at Lytham Partners. Before we begin, for those not familiar with Lytham Partners, it is one of the country's leading investor relations firms with more than 2 decades of corporate access experience. We have built one of the industry's most diverse and effective platforms for connecting small cap companies with high quality and focused institutional investors, while creating a framework of best practices in all aspects of investor relations. Today's presentation is hopefully yet another example where you could bring value to multiple constituents. We'll begin with our presentation regarding the cancer sector in a moment, but one final item. I want to remind everyone that our management teams are available for one-on-one meetings throughout the conference. If you have not already signed up for meetings, please send me an email at shamsian@lythampartners.com or visit lythampartners.com/select2024 and click on the buttons from there. From there, you can click on investor registration and make your one-on-one selections. For our current presentation, we welcome Bill Maughan, Senior Biotechnology Analyst with Canaccord Genuity, where he covers companies focused on the cancer space. Prior to joining Canaccord in 2022, Bill was an associate with Bank of America and Cowen. Bill received his PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology from Weill Cornell. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Bill Maughan. Bill, disclosures are hyperlinked in the description on the bottom of the video. With that, Bill, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me along. So I'll just give some comments on what we're seeing in the oncology space in the past couple of months or so. But before that, just to even talk about the industry as a whole, I think it's obvious from you just look at the chart of the XBI, right? It's been a good 2-3 months after a really bad 2+ years. And for the entire 2 years that the market has been down, most of the discussions that I heard in the industry were cautiously optimistic, people trying to be optimistic, something like, oh, it'll be back at some point, get ready for a few more quarters, and then the market's got to pick up. But then obviously with the Fed doing what they did with the rates over the past year, just added to the headwinds, coinciding, I'd say, with the market kind of bottoming out a little bit in the late October timeframe and things turning up in November, December. It really finally feels like there's some green shoots after what's been a pretty painful meltdown. You can see it already this year. JP Morgan conference in early January ushered in the year with 3 new buyouts on that Monday. That in itself is not entirely new. It's something similar happened last year, but there's also been a lot of secondaries that have priced in the past couple of weeks, and I think just the tone in general of my conversations with everybody is just getting better. And then speaking of those 3 buyouts, 2 of them were in oncology. Harpoon, which I cover, is developing T-cell engagers and was bought by Merck. And Ambrx, an antibody drug conjugate company, was bought by J&J. So the third, and incidentally the smallest acquisition, was an autoimmune. But what we're seeing in oncology is interesting. There's still, relatively speaking, few targets. We know HER2, DLL3, PSMA, BCMA, CD19, Nectin-4, a relatively limited roster. Even with that's just a selection of what's essentially a limited roster of targets. But what we don't know yet is how to best target each of them, and each of them has been targeted with varying successes with varying approaches. So as a result of that, we see different technological approaches kind of rise and fall in popularity as time progresses. So as I mentioned before, the ADC company Ambrx got bought out earlier this year. That follows Immunogen getting bought out by AbbVie in late 2023 and the closing of the Pfizer Seagen deal. Both of those are antibody drug conjugate companies as well. And Seagen had good data at which was basically the headline of ESMO this past year from PADCEV and ADC. There's been this is kind of on the heels of some interesting technological advances that until recently I feel have been largely underappreciated. There's been advances in linker technology and payload, and you have to tune the linker stability to get targeted delivery, but also A little bit of releasing the drug in the tumor microenvironment to get some bystander killing is can be beneficial. Um, and from my conversations with companies and investors, there's been a turn where a few years ago people weren't that excited about the next ADC, perceiving it kind of like a me too, just going after same target as other people with a similar approach that others have taken. But now there's become this recognition that apparently some apparently subtle advances were actually real technological uh, differentiators. There's plenty to watch out for this wave of ADCs. BioNTech has some interesting antibody drug conjugates in development. They've frankly got a lot of different oncology approaches that we feel are underappreciated as COVID sort of continues to suck the air out of the room there. But if their oncology platform takes more share of the spotlight near term, the chances are good it'll be because of the ADCs. Bicycle Therapeutics has an interesting approach where they use their own binding molecules called bicycles instead of antibodies to potentially drive more drug into the tumor and leave less in circulation. Its lead asset's meant to be a next-gen PADCEV, but they're using the platform to potentially hit targets that ADCs have tried and failed to hit in the hands of other companies. Theratechnologies, which we also cover, is using, instead of an antibody, they're using the ligand for the sortilin-1 receptor to seek out its tumor targets. But in addition to those we cover, several private companies are advancing next-gen ADC approaches, and they've been far more willing and excited to talk about them, I think, recently in recent quarters. The other approach we mentioned before, vis-a-vis Harpoon's buyout from Merck, is T-cell engagers. It's been a while that field has actually been very active, but largely in early development. So somewhat under the radar, although you wouldn't think so if you were standing at the poster section of a medical conference where they regularly take up several rows. As a reminder, that technology is just a molecule that binds a tumor target on one side and a T cell on the other, basically revving up that T cell and bringing it to the target so it can find and kill the tumor. That's a space that we think is only going to get bigger, and we think is ripe for M&A, as we saw recently with Harpoon, for a few reasons. First of all, they're probably going to be combined with checkpoint inhibitors regularly, if not just as the default in the future, I think. And those are often in the hands of large pharma. If you look no further than the BCMA bispecific targeting space, J&J, Pfizer, AbbVie are names in that development. These are also large call indications where I think that that these molecules make the most sense in the hands of large pharma. And looking forward, I think there's a lot to be excited about in the progress that we expect in the near term. So there's going to be developments in how these T-cell engagers bind the T-cell. Right now, they're normally binding by CD3, but CD28 and 4-1BB are potential targets that can also really stimulate the T-cell, but you just have to be careful to guard against overstimulation. Xencor has a portfolio of CD28 bispecifics that we think is very interesting. We also see a differentiated approach from Immunocore that's using T-cell receptor based binding that on their tumor targeting side. So a lot to pay attention to there, and I think there's just a ton of work going on in early development that will continue to make waves kind of one after another for the foreseeable future. I'd say next several years. Another unexpectedly hot space has been radiotherapy. With Novartis' launch of Pluvicto, I think that a lot of people's concerns with radiotherapy, in that it had never been a massive blockbuster, repeatable, for several reasons, including just the technology not fully being there, but also manufacturing issues and supply chain issues. Novartis has done a lot, has come a long way to solving those issues in the support of Pluvicto, and I think that a lot of people are seeing that you can overcome these, and there will be fast followers and people kind of right on their heels, and we've seen that there's been plenty of deal flow coming through in the radiotherapy world. Bicycle has signed collaborations to develop their bicycle targeting their bicycle platform to target tumor targets for radiotherapy, and they're working with Bayer. We saw Lilly bought out Point. We saw, I believe, ArchBio just recently did a funding round, and under my coverage, YMABS has in late last year had their initial data from their radiotherapy program called the SADA program, which is intended to increase the amount of radiotherapy that gets to the tumor and limits off-target effects, which is obviously crucial when you're injecting radioactive material into a patient. So a lot being done there that's been facilitated by some recent advances, and we think that'll continue to kind of develop in really interesting ways in the next year or so. And then the last technology I want to make sure I comment on is cell therapies, because I know I'm meant to focus on oncology here, but there's really been a very interesting development in the past 6 months or so in cell therapy. I covered 3 cell therapy companies that were primarily focused on oncology, those being Fate, Sentry, and Nkarta. Each of them has announced an autoimmune program headed into the clinic in the past 6 months or so. For a little background on that, cell therapies have been developed to target and kill cancer cells. CAR-Ts are the initial success story in that arena, but companies are trying to improve on the profile of NK cells to get them to do the same thing. So there's a lot of development in cell therapy for oncology, obviously, but it turns out that if you can use an engineered cell therapy to kill a cancer cell, that's a trick that can be used on autoimmune as well. And you see some early academic data has shown you can use a CAR-T cell to effectively reset a lupus patient's immune system. So while they had been victims of their own immune systems targeting their own organs, cell therapy can be used to call off that attack. And the evidence is early, but it's been in patients, and it made a big splash back at ASH in December. But as a result of some of that early work, a lot of companies that have been going after cancer have added autoimmune indications. Notably, Nkarta's stock reacted very favorably to the news that they had an autoimmune program in the back half of last year, back in October. They're developing NK cells, which have had an early indication of efficacy in oncology, but NK cells, the question remains for the moment, durability. Nkarta's taking their anti-CD19 NK cell into a program against lupus. They announced that back in October, and they have an IND cleared for that. So that there should be some interesting data from that in the relatively near term. Sentry Therapeutics is bringing their anti-CD19 program in against lupus as well. They're a little different from Nkarta in that Nkarta works with NK cells for their entire manufacturing process, while Sentry works with stem cells, edits them more extensively, and then differentiates them into NK cells. Still, their allogeneic approach is into the clinic early this year, with initial data as early as late this year. And Fate has been, it was really the leader of NK cell development when it was at its most, I'd say its hottest, its most exciting. And then the wind kind of came out of the sails of that approach for a little while. But Fate is pushing a T-cell program into the clinic for lupus. That's interesting in that the initial data for the field has been in CAR T cells. Right now, it's also important, though, to recognize that this is not oncology, and the side effect profile and lymphoconditioning that normally goes along with CAR T might be an issue in a larger scale, less end-of-life scenario. They're not the only ones going after it. As I said, we know of at least 15 similar programs that are chasing this initial efficacy or initial academic work. Kyverna is going after, announced their IPO. They're, I believe, in that process. We're not involved. Cabaletta is involved here again. We don't cover Cabaletta. But there's a long list of CAR T companies going after autoimmune. Adicet, which my colleague John Newman covers, recently announced a focus on autoimmune. And there's a lot of questions about how good this approach can be, how many diseases will it work in, and what's the best approach. So fortunately, with this full-scale effort, the space is poised to answer a lot of these questions and split out some winners in the next, say, year or two. And then finally, I would say, having watched the past year of development and of stocks kind of reacting to rate cuts or rate hikes, nothing quells that fear like a good commercial launch. So I would say, if you're looking for near term insulation from rate uncertainty, a good commercial launch is something to look for. And I know we covered Delcath, who's also a Lytham client, who just announced that they have shipped their first commercial product, I believe, about a week ago. So a lot going on in oncology, and really excited to see how this shapes up in the next several quarters and years.
All right, Bill. Well, thank you for that insightful presentation, and we look forward to having you on our upcoming events. And to everyone listening and watching, thank you for your participation, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.